gavel.
No worries.
How are you?
Yes.
Good.
Are we going to have only 5?
Western Lands agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Colfax
Thank you.
is supposed to be here, and he's not here. Kathy.
Call the meeting to order. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Madam Secretary, can you please do roll call?
Mr. Mund,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Odell,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Grande,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lowndes,
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Reynolds.
Yes, ma'am. Any announcements? Seeing none? Okay. Stephanie Morgan called me and told me she was sick. Sorry she couldn't make it, and her eyes bothering her, and Kathy Townsend's sick. Any disclosures? Seeing none. Go on to the minutes from last month's meeting. Review for and approval for the minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You have to do a roll call on that? No? Okay. So moved. Next, our first item tonight in the public hearings is item 3A, Land Development Code Text Amendment, Jenkins Road Area, Plan Special District 41205, Permitted Zoning and Rezoning, by Ms. Waite. Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman Reynolds and Commission members. For the record, Diana Waite, Senior Planner, presenting staff comments for the proposed Land Development Code text amendment to modify the rezoning section of the Jenkins Road Area Plan Special District. This item is a public hearing, and we have not received any public comments on the amendment to date. The location map on your screen shows the boundary of the special district. The proposed amendment would only apply to those lands. The North Jenkins Area Special District is located within the urban area and bordered by the city of Fort Pierce to the east and south. The district regulations were originally adopted in 2007 to guide development within the 1,700-acre area generally extending from Orange Avenue to Angle Road and Kings Highway to the west. Lands within the special district are primarily undeveloped. To date, no developments have been approved pursuant to these regulations. The proposed amendment would allow a 30.95-acre tract located at the southwest intersection of Angle Road and the future Taylor Dairy Road to be rezoned to CG. The 30-acre tract is delineated in orange on your screen. The petition would allow Angle Road Development to request a change in zoning for the 30-plus acre tract as commercial general, as has been conceptually approved by the Board of County Commissioners. If approved, a subsequent future land use map amendment to MXD and the proposed change in zoning to CG will be forwarded for your consideration. The proposed text amendment also provides for a waiver from the road and trail system standards that are within the special district regulations subject to approval of the Board of County Commissioners. The 30-acre tract is adjacent to industrial future land use designated lands to the west and residential urban lands to the east. The Jenkins Road Special District regulation limits the future land use map changes that can occur within the district without first amending text of the code. No changes to this section are proposed. The current zoning options for the subject 30-acre tract are PNRD or PMUD, a planned mixed-use development. Allowing the potential to request a change in zoning in the commercial general zoning district is not inconsistent with existing proposed uses surrounding the area. Industrial zoning is found to the west, and AR1 zoning to the east. Lands to the west are currently used as pasture lands, and the 20-acre parcel to the east has a single-family home and pasture lands. The special district allows parcels along Kings Highway to be rezoned to industrial light or a planned development district. Lands to the east of the 30-acre parcel are intended to be primarily residential and may be rezoned to planned non-residential development, planned unit development, or planned mixed-unit development in the future. This is a map on your screen of the road and trail system. The special district regulations were set out with very specific locations for the roadways and the sections for those roadways. So one of the items in this amendment will be the ability for the board to grant a waiver to those. In conclusion, staff has determined that the proposed changes conform to the standards of review as set forth in Section 110603 of the St. Lucie County Land Development Code and is not in conflict with the goals, objectives, and policies of the St. Lucie County Comprehensive Plan. Excuse me. We recommend that you forward this to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation of approval.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Yes,
Randy.
Mr. Chair. As I understand it, this change is in order to enable future land use and zoning changes based on a proposed settlement agreement. And if I understood the settlement agreement, it was to allow this parcel to become virtually any non-residential zoning.
Yeah, to be commercial general, I believe, was the language that we used in the.
Which is fine, but my question is how did mixed use get into this, which is or does allow residential? Is there a reason why we're not looking to go to a commercial future land use with commercial general zoning?
Yes, actually the reason why we're recommending MXD is because it's consistent with the existing Jenkins Road overlay area. And that would also give future owners of the property more options as far as development. They could still development as part of a commercial center or a mixed-use T&D type development that was originally conceptualized for the area.
So the wording in here about the settlement indicating not residential is not right.
Yeah, would have to look at the settlement agreement, but again, that's based on some discussions and proposals that went back and forth, what has been agreed to, and I believe, and also the agent for the property owners are here that can speak to that. But what was agreed upon was commercial future land or commercial general zoning.
That's correct. I mean, it has a bit of a complicated history, but I think the settlement agreement does envision that it is commercial general. That was the request, and that was in the settlement, and that is, been the request of, of the applicant, I guess, as it were. So,
Which I have no problem with.
Right.
I think that's an excellent agreement, which makes me wonder why. So why not a commercial future land use as opposed to
I just think
bringing in the MXD, which would open the door for residential on this property?
Yeah, I think that when we looked at sort of the technical means of processing this and trying to keep it consistent with what's already there, I think it's that point, Dinah, correct me if I'm wrong, but we just felt that was appropriate.
So we can expect, though, that the eventual zoning change application is going to
Yes.
be to CG?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Does the applicant, is there someone here, property owner, like to speak? Please come to the podium and state your name, please.
Good evening. For the record, Bob Raines with the Gunster Law Firm here on behalf of Angle Road Development. First of all, let me just start out by saying we appreciate staff's time, Mr. Satterley and Ms. Waite, for working with us on this project. They've been very helpful and working through it. To answer Mr. Grande's question, I think we're still within the spirit of the agreement. Staff explained to us that they thought the MXD would be the best land use. We had the same concerns, but this text amendment will address those concerns, and I think we'll keep within the spirit of what we were trying to accomplish, which was a non-residential use at this time. If some future land use owner, if we sell the property or whatnot, wants to move forward, then that will give them the option. But I do think that what's being proposed here this evening is still within the intent of the settlement agreement. So we're fine with the text amendment, and we'll then, move forward with the other amendments as necessary. But I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Grande?
It's virtually the same question. That is, can we assume that the applicant will be coming forward in the near future with a zoning change application to CG?
Yes, sir, correct. It'll be that, and then also, I think, we're going to come forward with the developers agreement with respect to that too, on some of the other issues as was contemplated within the settlement agreement. But yes, correct.
Thank you, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions? All right, thank you. This is a public hearing, so I'd like to open it to the public. Is there anyone who'd like to come up and speak this time? Seeing none, I'll close the public section of it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
motion to approve.
Is there any further discussion, or Mr. Adele, or Commissioner Adele? Go ahead.
All right. After considering the testimony presented during the public hearing, including staff comments and the standards of review as set forth in Section 11.06.03, St. Lucie County Land Development Code, I hereby move that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the St. Lucie County Board of Commissioners grant approval of the amendment to Land Development Code Section 4.12.05 of the Jenkins Road Area Plan Special District, because the proposed amendment is consistent with the existing and proposed land uses in the area and is not in conflict with any element of the St. Lucie County Comprehensive Plan.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Roll call, please.
Mr. Grande?
Having heard from the applicant and the staff that they do intend to move forward with a commercial general, I'm voting yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lowndes?
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Reynolds?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Culverhouse?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mund?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Odell?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Gone the County Commissioners. Next item up is item 3B, Land Development Code Revision Proposal Shoreline Protection Section, presented by Ms. Griffin.
Good evening, Planning and Zoning members. For the record, I'm Amy Griffin with the Environmental Resources Department. Tonight, I'm going to present an overview of the entire Shoreline Protection Code with particular focus on the proposed revisions. At the direction of the County Administrator, we are conducting a workshop for this board prior to the official public hearing in order to give you the opportunity to hear and digest changes and ask questions and provide input. The Shoreline Protection section of the Land Development Code details the regulations regarding development along the river shorelines located in unincorporated St. Lucie County. Specifically, the Indian River Lagoon, the North Fork of the St. Lucie River, 10 Mile Creek, and 5 Mile Creeks and their tributaries. These waterways are valuable natural resources, and it is in the best interest of St. Lucie County to preserve the shorelines and adjacent uplands of these waterways because they provide habitat, filter pollutants from stormwater, prevent erosion, and protect water quality. Over the years, staff has received a number of requests for variances from these requirements. Typically, the variances are due to constraints of small lots and the need to build homes or accessory uses within a portion of the required shoreline buffer, or the need to address severe shoreline erosion. While reviewing those projects, staff identified several components of the code that contributed to a somewhat confusing, arduous, and expensive process. ERD has worked diligently to develop a consistent, efficient, and predictable review process. This benefits the applicants as well as county staff while achieving the same protection of natural resources for which we have always strived. In an effort to bring this code in line with that philosophy, we have drafted revisions and took them through the public vetting process for input, going through multiple versions until we arrived at the one you have before you tonight. Some of the groups who have reviewed and provided input on the code revisions include the Environmental Advisory Committee, the Development Review Committee, the 298 districts, including North St. Lucie River Water Control District and Fort Pierce Farms, as well as the county attorney and county administration. The proposed revisions do not increase restrictions. Mr. Ferguson. The revisions are simply clarifications to existing codes, codification of current practices, addition of greater flexibility in meeting requirements, and delegation of variance authority to the Environmental Resources Department Director. The first change to the code involves simplifying the purpose and intent of this code, as well as a better definition of the geographic extent of which these regulations apply. And if you want to follow along in your draft and your package, those changes begin on pages 3 of 16. The buffer widths and requirements along the North Fork and its tributaries stayed the same, but the language explaining them was revised with the intent to make the requirements clearer. Buffers are required measuring 50 feet wide or 75 feet wide, depending on when a particular lot was platted, consisting of preserved or planted native vegetation. Removal of non-native vegetation is allowed. A private access and/or dock is allowed. Construction, development activities, motorized vehicles, and shoreline alteration are not allowed unless authorized by a variance, which we will discuss in a moment. The buffer widths and requirements along the Indian River Lagoon also stayed the same, but again, the language explaining them was revised with the intent to make the requirements clearer. Buffers measuring 50 feet wide are required unless physically impossible, as in the case of the Indian River Drive occurring within the 50 feet of the mean high water line. Also, existing lots of record as of August 1st, 1989 are exempt from these requirements. The requests for variances related to hardened shorelines are typically our most frequent requests. Hardened shorelines require a variance and must meet specific design criteria provided by the appropriate jurisdictional agency, which is typically the Department of Environmental Protection. Hardened shorelines are armored in some way, such as with seawalls, upland retaining walls, or riprap in the form of coquina or other material. These structures are designed and installed by professional engineers and approved by the appropriate agencies, as well as the building officials of St. Lucie County. Our involvement is to first determine if all other alternatives have been explored and assist in finding the best possible solution to the problem. Then, once the structure is determined, we ensure that the upland buffer and the littoral zone requirements are met. One area of the code that was lacking clarity is the planting section. Several years ago, ERD established standardized restoration guidelines that we are able to apply throughout many areas of the Land Development Code. These guidelines make it possible to come up with a quantity that is consistent from project to project. The locations of the planted materials within the buffer can be tailored to each site to maintain views and suit the desired appearance by the applicant. In an effort to assist the applicant to better provide long-term maintenance of the buffer, we clarified that a preserve area management plan needs to contain a description of what will be planted and details of how to take care of it. List of native plant species that can be used as replacement or enhancement, exotic removal information, and descriptions of allowable uses. The preserve area management plan is meant to be used like a reference guide or an owner's manual for the buffer. The standards of review when reviewing a request for variance remain the same and include assurance that denial of the variance will not result in an unnecessary hardship for the applicant versus a mere inconvenience, such as severe property loss or damage and unsafe conditions. Circumstances of the variance request are beyond the control of the applicant. Granting the variance will not adversely affect adjacent shorelines or injure other property or improvements in the immediate vicinity. Granting the variance will not adversely affect water quality or contribute to shoreline erosion or siltation of the adjacent water body. The project is the minimum necessary for reasonable protection and/or use of the land, building, or structures. And lastly, that the project achieves the general intent and purpose of the Land Development Code and the goals, objectives, and policies of the comp plan. In the current code, the Environmental Resources Director has the authority to grant a 10-foot variance. This covered small encroachments from the upland side of the buffer. However, anything greater than 10 feet or any alterations to the actual shoreline required a public hearing before the Board of County Commissioners for consideration. The application cost for the variance is $850, and in addition, the applicant is responsible for the advertising costs. The preparation for a public hearing is an arduous and costly task for the applicant. Probably the most substantial change we are proposing to this code is to delegate the variance approval authority to the ERD Director. The applicant will still be held to the same standards of review. However, the process will be much swifter and much less expensive. We have made it clear in the code that denied variance requests, including those denied due to impact on adjacent properties or incompatibility with a neighborhood, will still be appealed to the Board of County Commissioners via a public hearing. In summary, staff feels the proposed revisions will clarify shoreline buffer requirements and streamline the shoreline variance process while preserving St. Lucie County's valuable natural resources. No action is required at this time, as this is a workshop. The next step moving forward will be the official public hearing in front of this board, which is tentatively scheduled for May, followed soon thereafter with the 2 required public hearings in front of the Board of County Commissioners. I am available for any questions or input you may have now, and of course, any of you or the public are free to contact me as we move through the approval process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions for her this time? Mr. Chairman Lowndes? Or Commissioner Lowndes? I'm moving you up.
Please don't. Ms. Griffin, if on the 10 Mile Creek area up to McCarty Road, if a landowner wanted to remove the exotics, the Brazilian peppers and such have you that are on the shoreline, can they do that at will?
Well, they would not need a shoreline variance via this section of the code. What they would need, however, is a vegetation removal permit and an inspection by the Environmental Resources Department staff to clarify that that is indeed native vegetation, and that if any other environmental protections need to be put in place, especially since you're along the shoreline of a river, a water body, such as silt fence or something like that, an erosion control barrier, we have those conditions of approval to place on the vegetation removal permit. It is an exotic removal permit, and just for the record, there's no fee for those for a single-family homeowner.
If they remove if they're granted a permit and they remove the Brazilian peppers, Melaleuca, whatever may be considered exotics, are they required then to replant other than ground cover on the shoreline?
A vegetation removal permit does not constitute a development approval. The introduction to the shoreline protection section of the code explains that the details for this to trigger this shoreline buffer are development approval. So I do not see how that would that particular situation would require the replanting of natives. We'd probably encourage it, but not require it.
Where did we come up with the $850?
Growth Management set those fees, and they were adopted by the Board of County Commissioners via resolution.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if a little creek next to your house is or near the shoreline is filled up with hyacinths, do you have to get a permit to get rid of those?
You got to get a permit to sneeze. Boy, where you coming from?
I don't know.
This county, St. Lucie County, does not regulate waterward of the mean high water line.
Yeah.
That's a whole different agency, and it depends on what water body that is. If you're up in 5 Mile, 10 Mile Creek, you may have to go through the 298 districts, but I don't know what their requirements are, and I don't think they're very, I don't think they'd require you to get a permit to remove those, but you'd need to check with them.
But Mr. Chairman, if I could just follow, In regard to the Brazilian peppers, which are just a pest, and they're hard to get rid of, you can remove them and there's no consequences as long as you have a permit?
That's correct.
And it doesn't cost anything for a permit?
That's correct.
How long was the application to fill out?
How long is the application?
How big is it and how many?
Well, the application is 4 pages, but you're applying for an exemption, so really only 2 of those pages apply to you. It's the front page with your name and address. Second page, you check that you're removing exotic removal. Sign the back page. It's fairly simple.
And how do you set up the inspector coming out and looking at the property?
Typically, unless it's specified on the permit application, we just go out there on our own. The submittal of the permit actually gives us permission to go onto the property. However, there's a section on the front page of the application that says if you have a dog or a gate code or anything we need to know, give us a phone number, or if you want to make an appointment, and then we make the appointment.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, Ms. Griffin, thank you, and no actions required, so we will hopefully see you in May.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next item. Item 3C, comprehensive plan text amendment to revise regulations related to residential development in areas designated AG5 and AG 2.5. And I don't see Ms. Wilson, so hi.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. For the record, I'm Kara Wood. I'm the planning consultant.
Consultant. Welcome.
The county's tractor beams have called me back. So these are companion items, both related to amendments to the regulations related to residential development on agricultural lands, Ag 5 and Ag 2.5. So item C is a comprehensive plan text amendment, and item D is a land development code text amendment. Notice of this public hearing for both public hearings was published in the St. Lucie News Tribune on April 4th. No public comments have been received. Staff have only received inquiries regarding the details of the public hearing and wanting to know where the agenda item was. This is just a map of the study area or the subject area. The area outlined in purple is Ag 5 and Ag 2.5 lands. And this is the accompanying zoning maps. As you can see, there's this equates to about, I believe, 180,000 acres of Ag 5 land. So as you can see in the staff report that you received in your packet, the debate over Ag PUDs and how to develop residential development on agricultural land has had quite a history. So I'm going to take some liberty of doing an extraordinary abbreviation of this history, kind of outlined in this timeline. I'll start with one of the many Ag PUDs that I got to take part in when I was staff at the county Shin Lakes. And the submission of this Ag PUD and the subsequent review by staff and the review by the Board of County Commissioners led to an interpretation of how open space is defined and placed in Ag PUDs, such that the board determined that the 80% of open space that is required in policy, I believe it's 1123, is to be entirely outside of backyards. It's essentially, defined as common open space, and that was kind of a shift in how, in past practices. So this led to a concern from a number of landowners and subsequent filings of a Burt Harris takings claim, as well as some class action lawsuits. And so this debate over the Board of County Commissioners' position over how to define and allocate open space in Ag PUDs versus what the landowners had previously understood and were expecting, then led to what has become a comprehensive study known as the Western Land Study, which was initiated in 2009 as a way to really comprehensively look at agricultural lands and the questions of, how do we preserve agriculture in St. Lucie County, and how do we appropriately regulate residential development on these lands. That study was completed in 2011, and since then there's just been a kind of a debate over so how do we proceed from here, and what things do we implement at what point. So essentially, the Board of County Commissioners has directed staff to deal just with the open space issues that were the primary initiator of the Western Land Study, and then we would proceed in some of the other aspects of the Western Land Study subsequently. So the issues being considered tonight in these amendments consider only the subdivision of lots under existing zoning and the development of lots through the PUD process. In a very brief summary, I would say that after years of analysis of the open space issue, staff sees little value in the existing regulations. It's our understanding that the 80% open space requirement is intended to accomplish a couple of things. Number one, reduce the cost of public infrastructure, and there's language in the policy to allude to that, as well as for the preservation of land for active agriculture. And after a lot of conversations with a lot of landowners and a lot of reading about the subject of agriculture, and of course we're urban planners, we're not rural planners, so this is it's really all new to us when we approach this subject. So in trying to be sensitive to the range of issues, we really see that, or the kind of conclusion that we've come to is that the existing regulations kind of accomplish neither of these goals. They really don't do anything to reduce the overall cost of providing public services to residential development far west of the urban service boundary, and they really don't do anything to ensure the preservation of active agriculture, because as you can see, there's a lot of agricultural land lying fallow in St. Lucie County under these regulations. There's nothing that development regulations can, in and of themselves, can fundamentally do to ensure that agriculture stays active. So relying on these policies, we didn't think was an effective way to yield those results. And then in addition, the 80% open space requirement, under the interpretation that 80% is fully outside of private lots and is essentially common is for active ag, really result in a suburban style of development in rural areas of the county that then don't provide advantage to the county. So if you do the mathematics of that kind of development form, you end up with lots that really have to be less than an acre. They're about a quarter acre lots, kind of in the middle of nowhere. So it doesn't serve what we believe to be a useful function in the residential marketplace either. Because why would you move to the middle of nowhere and buy a lot that you could, the size of which you could buy in Port St. Lucie? So again, just to kind of summarize that, that we didn't see that there was any great value in preserving the existing regulations. The proposed amendments do a couple of things. They increase the number of lots that are allowed to be developed under straight zoning from 8 to 45. This is something that a lot of the landowners had requested to do a little bit more in terms of their by right developments. And then it essentially removes all of the existing policy language and land development code requirements that are related to this 80% open space requirement. So essentially, if these regulations get adopted, if you are doing a relatively small agricultural development, which in these regulations is defined as less than 400 units, then you would do, the regulations that apply to you would default to the existing PUD regulations that apply elsewhere in the county, which is 35% open space. Staff did feel that it was essential to still consider this issue of how does the county overall, and again, not just the Board of County Commissioners, but there are a number of of agencies that are responsible for providing public services to residents. How do those services get provided for large developments out in agricultural lands? And staff felt that it was essential to look further at very large development forms and make sure that the provision of public services was mitigated. So that's been, and I think what's outlined in your staff report had been at that time it was kind of a point of disagreement between staff and the landowners. There's a paragraph in your staff report that points to the need to include this idea that if you're doing large-scale residential development, you need to in some way figure out how to compensate for the provision of those public services. Subsequent to your staff report being distributed, staff and the landowners have worked together to come up with revised language for that paragraph that we now both agree can be implemented into policy 1123. So what's in front of you here is a strike-through and underline version of the paragraph that staff had been recommending, that's included in your staff report, that then, with these changes, the landowners would also agree to. So staff recommendation for item C is, which is the comprehensive plan text amendments, is for the ordinance amending the comprehensive plan to be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval with this paragraph added to policy 1.1.2.3. So this is, again, language that both staff and the landowners are in agreement on. And then if those comprehensive plan amendments are approved, then there's similar language that's kind of repeated in the Land Development Code that also must be revised. So if the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends approval for the comprehensive plan amendments, staff recommends the ordinance amending the Land Development Code also be forwarded for approval. So that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Wood?
Mr. Chair? Was the original open space requirement intended to cluster development, I guess, to reduce public costs? Is that the original intention?
Mr. Odell, that's what the language, what the language alludes to.
I wanted to make sure that originally. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Commissioner Lowndes.
Mr. This doesn't have any effect or any jurisdiction on the fiasco that's up on Indrio Road and whatever we used to call that development up there that, I don't even know what it's called. What do we call it?
Mr. Lowndes, there were a number of developments that were proposed near Indrio Road. Are you referring to Cloud Grove?
No.
No, I'm referring to the charrette areas that we had between,
The TBC?
thank you.
This has nothing to do with the TBC, Mr. Lowndes.
It's exempt from this?
I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Culverhouse.
Carol, what is the, as far as open space, are yards and pastures counted as open space?
No.
Well, Mr. Culverhouse, that's the $190 million question. And that's the point of disagreement between, or the point of differentiation and interpretation of how those policies are implemented.
What? Mr. Chairman, in the non-ag areas, the yards count as open space?
No.
Okay. What's the recommendation then in what's being recommended here or brought before the Planning and Zoning tonight? Is it, what's staff's recommendation?
Well, the staff's recommendation is to strike all of the policy language that is currently in the comprehensive plan that basically differentiates residential development, PUD developments in ag lands versus PUD developments in residential lands. So that if you are now, so if these amendments get adopted and you are going to do a planned unit development on ag lands up to 400 units, that the same regulations that apply inside the urban service boundary would apply outside the urban service boundary. You would have 35% open space.
And that 35% open space can't be part of the platted residential lots.
Right.
So it's the same as what exists today for inside the urban service boundary.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lowndes.
Mr. Grundy, restate that for me, please. The 35% that's in here now is the same as what we have within the urban service area?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. That is, it used to be 80%, and the question was, could that 80% include lands within the platted residential lot?
That drew blood.
Okay,
Yep.
now,
Mr. Lowndes,
the change really says,
Excuse me.
go back.
For a minute. Mr. Lowndes, can you please have your mic closer for you, please? Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, the change really says, strike the difference between inside and outside, go to the 35% open space that has to be, and there's a list in here of the
Correct.
various types, but you can't count land within the platted residential lot. which is good.
I can't count my platted lot as such of that 35%.
Right. But you only have to get the 35%, and in some cases, less, if in the 35%, you're maintaining habitat, you get a 150% credit for that for over 15 acres. So you can get to down to about 28%, which is not really bad at all.
Mr. Chairman, one question for Mr. Satterley, if I could. Was there any consideration between 5 units and 4 units per acre from the landowners?
I don't think I understand your question, Mr. Lowndes. You mean in...
On page 4, the top paragraph carries over, and it talks about the 400-unit threshold at 5 dwelling units per acre. Mm-hmm. That gives us a density of well, whatever.
Right.
Was there any consideration to having 4 instead of 5 so that we don't have that density there?
No, that would be an increase in density.
Go to 4 units instead of 5?
It's not 4, it's one unit per
1 unit
5
per
acres.
5 acres is how it's calculated.
Thank you. All right. 5 dwellings per unit acre. I don't get
No,
a house on 5 acres.
It's 1 unit per 5 acres.
Oh, I apologize. I see. It's a typographical error.
Thank you.
It's an error in the wording of the paragraph. I apologize.
You see where I'm talking about, where it's talking about 5 dwelling units per acre? That should be
5 acres per dwelling
unit.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Mr. Culverhouse.
Mr. Chairman, if you have how big is a lot in the Ag 5, for example? If it's a 5-acre ranchette, is all 5 acres a lot?
Yes.
So none of that counts towards open space?
In a straight subdivision, if it was, up to 45 units, yeah, it would just be a straight subdivision of 5-acre tracts. There would be usually some reduction for roads and, other things that provide access or whatever, but it'd be about 5 acres per unit. In the PUD, what you find is that, what we found in the Ag PUDs, in our experience with the 4 or 5 that came through the process, which were Shin Lakes was the first one that Kara brought up, which was probably the one that closest resembled what the code of the time required, where we had about 350 acres, got about 78, quarter or 3/4 acre lots, and then about a 200 tract open of ag land. It was out in the middle of a former citrus grove. We also had Shin Equestrian, which was about 120 units, I don't recall. But that was done more as a standard PUD. The board approved that. The board approved Shin 251, and the board also approved Hunter's Run. I think Hunter's Run was probably the best example of a PUD in that it preserved a tremendous amount of native habitat. There was some flexibility in the lots, and I think that achieved sort of what you would achieve in a well-done PUD. I think on the other side of it was Shin Lakes, which was what Peter Jones used to call cluster sprawl. We had clustered these lots together on the north end of this piece of land out off a Shin Road that was otherwise completely undeveloped, and it was these little lots, and it wasn't achieving anything that we think was envisioned in what the language was attempting to achieve. And I think at that point when we did that analysis, that's why we began to feel more comfortable with, we think that the PUD requirements can address what we're trying to achieve in the broader, in the preservation of open space and the preservation of ag land.
Mr. Culverhouse, if I may, because of your question, if somebody is developing in the AG5 with 5-acre lots, there is no open space requirement, so they're not losing anything.
Right.
If they're developing where?
If they're in an AG5 and they're not doing a PUD, they're doing a straight development under AG5, so their lot has to be 5 full acres. There is no open space requirement whatsoever. So the fact that they have to stay with a 5-acre lot doesn't mean they're losing anything
got to be a catch somewhere.
Well, what happens is that in Table 710 in the Land Development Code is you're limited to a 10% lot coverage. So in effect, you can only cover 10% of your 5-acre lot with building. And so, in effect, you have a tremendous amount of, of unbuilt upon land that is technically
Open space.
open space.
You also have a half-acre house.
Mr. Chairman,
We
what
don't have
about-
an FAR, and so,
does a bar pit count, or water, a new lake count as open space?
yes.
Even if it's used for drainage or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, typically people, dig a hole in the ground to build a pad for their house, and that's...
Any further questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Grande?
Actually, I think this is pretty good. I only took exception to one thing that you said in your presentation, and that was the comment about getting down to very small lots of a quarter acre. I think that if you're talking about 80% open space, which is dying, if you're talking about that, you would have in AG5 1-acre lots,
Well,
not quarter-acre lots.
I said 3/4 acre.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I misheard, I apologize. What is the significance of 45? I look at this and I think in terms of sections or, some logical land size. I'm not saying 45 is good or bad. It just seems like if I have an AG 2.5, to get to 45, I'm looking at 112.5 acres. 45
I wouldn't
doesn't
read too
seem,
much into it, Mr. Grande.
doesn't ring a bell to
It was
any.
less than what the landowners wanted.
Yeah, I mean, in the discussions, the Western Lands Plan had proposed increasing it from 8 lots to 20. And I think that, in our sort of our discussions as we were looking at how to resolve this, they were like, well, why don't we just go to 90? And we said, well, no, that's really at that point, then you're really starting to have a much more intense development. And we felt that 45 was a reasonable compromise. It's arbitrary.
Okay.
Any
The
further questions for staff?
Yeah, the next question is, I agree with you on that quarter acre or 3/4 acre lot. I mean, the last thing in the world we want is small lots outside of the urban service boundary that would create a need for urban services. So is there any reason why we don't want to put in a 1-acre minimum size?
I would say, Mr. Grande, that we could certainly, I guess it wasn't, I guess what it came down to is that it didn't seem a priority. It didn't seem a priority to start to, kind of micromanage the development forms, at least at this level. We wanted to, again, we wanted to get the open space issue sort of set aside. And then the full intention, from staff's part and from the landowner's part is to continue working on the fuller details of development forms and how, and kind of the development regulations that really belong in the code, we feel, rather than the comprehensive plan, which is there to provide us with, with overall guidance. So I would anticipate that there would be, more details fleshed out, kind of in phase 2 of the amendments.
Well, but tonight's presentation also has the code changes in the next item that's before us, and it doesn't either. It also exposes us to the possibility of much smaller lots outside the urban service boundary, which is kind of suicidal from a protect your tax money perspective.
Well, I mean, if you're suggesting that, well, then someone could develop a very large number of small lots that would, that would necessitate those kinds of services, water and sewer services, well, the developer would have to pay for those, under the current development scenario, the developer would have to pay for the extension of those services to their site, which presumably would be cost prohibitive. I mean, just under, under the sort of realistic scenario, the more likely scenario, again, based on the PUDs that we've seen come through the process, would not be for a development of that style. They would want to put their lots on well and septic, and they would want a rural style development. Yes, it could happen, but under other regulations in the county's comprehensive plan, the county doesn't really have any obligation to provide those services unless the developer pays for them. Does that make sense?
Well,
so it wasn't our concern.
No, it doesn't make sense only because I can't think of a reason why. What we're doing here, I think, is we're saying clustering is over in St. Lucie County. The 80% or the 35% is good enough, and I don't have a problem going with that, quite frankly. But if we're going to go there, I really would like us not to get down to pseudo-clustering that does require urban services outside the urban service boundary, because we have cases where people say, well, there already is a line in the ground to handle this reservation or that special district out by the turnpike exit. We ought to be able to tap into that. And, we faced those kind of things in the past that would only be required if the densities were such that urban services make sense. It'd be real neat if we said, okay, since we're going to end the life of clustering and we're going to try to do suburban development, I think we really should try to avoid urban services at all cost by saying, if you're going to develop in an area that's outside the urban service boundary, if you're not going to do 1 per 5, okay, and you're going to go with a PUD and you're going to leave the 35% open space, don't put any residential lots in there that are less than an acre, so you can go well and septic. And
Yeah, point well taken.
Commissioner, yeah, and we can look at that. I think that we've taken recommend taking the cluster language out, but I don't think that it prohibits somebody necessarily if the conditions warrant it. And I think of Hunter's Run, where, there may be some lots that are less than an acre. There may be some 3/4 or, lots that, but, again, it would be up to the developer whether or not, they were going to, do something that would require then, something other than well and septic. So, that would factor into it. I'm not sure, but we'll take a look at it and just see if there are circumstances where that might come into play. But anyway, okay.
thank you.
Any further questions?
Yeah, on page 6, at the top of the page, one of the things that we're talking about is TDRs within the same parcel. Did I misunderstand that?
Mr. Grande, are you looking at the ordinance itself?
Yeah, which is what we're really talking about. On the top of the page 6, on the new verbiage in there,
Right.
reduce the cost of providing public services to the proposed development. Such techniques may include but not be limited to using transfer of development rights to cluster density in an area closer to the urban service boundary. Now that TDR would be, I don't understand how you move rights within the parcel, because if you are a PUD, you have the right to put the development wherever you want within that PUD. So what is a TDR within the same parcel?
Well, first of all, this is also the language that's specifically proposed to be revised. So the paragraph that you're looking at in the draft ordinance, you can see on your screen, that language is now proposed to not be there.
Oh, the addition is no longer an addition.
Right.
Okay.
But I think, I mean, to answer your question, that was under the, that was also considering that this revised policy language includes the ability to include more than one parcel in your PUD. So you could have multiple parcels and transfer from off-site. But in any case, we're proposing.
How do we control that? And the reason I say that is I have actually less experience in that area than, for example, historically out on the island where people moved development rights from one side of A1A to the other in order to cluster rights for the high rises and preserve the lagoon shorelines. But what we discovered over time was people would sell off the lagoon side, and it would be, we would forget that they no longer had rights. And people would say, oh, great, this is in the 5 to the acre, and new rights were born. If we treat a PUD as covering more than one parcel, and we move rights from one of the parcels to the other, which is probably a good idea, how do we preserve the fact that the sending parcel doesn't have the rights that you would think it had if you just looked at the zoning?
Well, I mean, there are a number of legal ways to do that. And again, that's one of the advantages of including multiple parcels in one PUD, is that when you see that it's rezoned to PUD, you see what the plan is for that parcel. And so if that's the sending parcel, then it would have no density attached to it. There are other people in the room who could answer that more, with more expertise than I do. But yes, there are various ways to strip parcels of their density. In any case, that's, any version of, other than, again, being able to, just the right to be able to include multiple parcels in a single PUD, which I think is still existing in these amendments. The whole transfer of density is being taken out of the equation for these amendments.
Good. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Grande, I see you closed your book of questions. Any other questions of staff at this time? This time I'd like to open up for the public. If you come up to the podium, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Jonathan Ferguson. I'm here on behalf of a number of the Western landowners. We've been working with staff to resolve the issues, primarily the open space issue, as Kara outlined, in large part so we can resolve the litigation and we can all move forward and be more productive in our efforts and not be fighting over something that happened 6-7 years ago. As Kara suggested, we are in accordance with what staff's recommending, with the addition of the changes that we negotiated at the last minute for the over 400 units. We're here to answer any questions on history, if we want to go there. Mr. Grande, I did want to mention an example. You were asking about the small units. One possible example, Shin 251 was on the northeast corner of Shin Road and State Road 70. The southwest corner of that project was left out as a potential future neighborhood commercial site, because your residential PUDs allow for 3% of the project to be neighborhood commercial. There would be, assuming you could get water and sewer to serve that commercial use, there might be an instance where you would have live-work units or some smaller type of unit within that sort of neighborhood commercial node. So to put in a minimum lot size might hinder that type of effort. But generally speaking, well and septic requirements are going to require at least 3/4 1 acre sizes. So I think there's other regulations that will drive minimum lot sizes. I don't think we need to add it here. Staff's been great to work with. The county commission's been giving very positive directions. We're looking forward to a positive reception when we go to the county commission. And again, we're looking forward to moving forward in addressing the stickier issues that came out of the Western Land Study. That's going to take some more time. But these are the low-hanging fruit, and it's going to be nice to be moving forward and making progress. So again, any we're available for questions. I appreciate your consideration.
Mr. Lowndes.
Mr. Ferguson, you and your group do pretty well agree to the proposal that's on the projection right now, the 400 acres and larger, such have you?
We agree 100%. We have no reservations. That was done cooperatively with staff.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions for Ms. Ferguson? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? This time, we'll close the public hearing. And any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Nobody?
Mr. Lowndes.
I'd like to congratulate staff and the folks that have been working on this. Some of you are here. This is a great improvement over what we waded through 6-7 years ago with some of this. And I'm amazed at how smoothly it appears and how complicated we tried to make it many years ago. Staff, gentlemen of the western areas, folks, thank you. I think we've headed this thing in a more positive direction than it has been in many years.
Amen.
Motion?
Mr. Chair, motion to approve. After considering the testimony presented during the public hearing, including staff comments, I hereby move that the Planning and Zoning Commission of St. Lucie County recommend that the St. Lucie County Board of County Commissioners approve the proposed ordinance amending the comprehensive plan as it relates to residential development of agricultural lands, because the proposed amendments are consistent with the St. Lucie County Comprehensive Plan and the Land Development Code, and will create a sustainable plan for the county's western lands through a functional network of agriculture, open space, and natural areas, while providing economically viable options for agricultural landowners.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Grande?
Yeah, I sincerely believe that this should have a 1 acre minimum in it, and I would just like to reiterate that recommendation, but I am going to support the application.
Madam Secretary, can a roll call, please?
Mr. Munt?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Culverhouse?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Grande?
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Reynolds?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lowndes?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Odell?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, before to the Board of County Commissioners.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but you do need to open the second public hearing on the Land Development Code Amendment.
3D, okay. So we're going to open a public part on section 3D. Anyone wish to speak on that? Seeing none?
I have a question of staff.
All right, let me close the public hearing and then close the public hearing at this time. Mr. Grande.
On page 3, in paragraph 1A, I guess it is, where you've added in stormwater treatment areas.
Yes, sir.
Later on, they're referred to as stormwater retention areas. I don't have a problem with stormwater retention area being in there, but because of all of the reservoir and STA work that's going on, I would hate this to be, to include the STAs that are being built that don't relate to this specific parcel. You know, if somebody has a parcel out in the western land and they're going to use it for an STA for the South Florida Water Management District, I mean, that shouldn't be here. This should be the stormwater retention areas for the parcel in question. So I would just like to see the word treatment changed to retention there.
Any other questions for staff? Call for a motion.
Motion?
Mr. Dell.
Motion to approve. After considering the testimony presented during the public hearing, including staff comments, I hereby move that the Planning and Zoning Commission of St. Lucie County recommend that the St. Lucie County Board of County Commissioners approve the proposed ordinance amending the Land Development Code as it pertains to residential development of agricultural lands, because the proposed amendments are consistent with the St. Lucie County Comprehensive Plan and the Land Development Code, and will create a sustainable plan for the county's western lands through a functioning network of agriculture, open space, and natural areas, while providing economically viable options for agricultural landowners.
Second.
Mr. Munt, second. Any further discussion?
Just, I would like to reiterate the recommendation for the 1 acre minimum for lot size in the PUD.
Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd like a point of clarification. In the Secretary's notes that are forwarded, those are not a recommendation of the Commission. That is a recommendation only of Mr. Grande.
Mr. Culverhouse?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lowndes?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Grande?
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Reynolds?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mund?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Odell?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, it'd be forward to the Board of County Commissioners. Ms. Wood, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Any other business this time? Mr. Satterley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, the county is going to a minute track system, which is a paperless agenda. The Board of County Commissioners had their first meeting with it not too long ago. It was fairly successful. I would anticipate at some point in the future that that this board may also be subject to going to the paperless agenda. Just kind of want to give you a heads up that that may be coming your way.
Do we all get laptops like theirs?
I'll have to check and see if that's in the budget, or maybe it's part of your pay.
Part of our pay.
Yeah, withhold it out of what I get.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Satterley, how does May's meeting look so far? That good, huh?
Leslie says it looks like a thumbs up. I don't know what that means. Are there a lot of agenda items?
Does that mean we'll have coffee and wait and rest, or what?
Are we having a meeting in May? We are having a meeting in May. There appear to be several items, although I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I should make Ms. Olson come up here and recite them from memory.
Don't we already have Amy's
Yes,
changes?
we do.
One of Amy's.
Yep. But I'm sure we have some other items. I just can't think of them. I'm sorry.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
We'll focus on